Welcome back. Our panel is ready, and so I'll just do a quick introduction. The panel is called Transition to Virtual Learning, Challenges, Exemplars, and Opportunities. It is going to be moderated by Manit Jain, who is chairperson of FICCI Arise, the school education arm of FICCI. An education leader for 20 years through his institutions, Manit has brought experiential education to the mainstream in India. Over the years, he has consistently challenged the status quo, being at the forefront of educational reforms in the country. Welcome, Manit. Thank you for agreeing to moderate this very important session. And may I now hand over to you.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for having me here, and welcome everyone to this panel. I'd like to quickly introduce all of our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Srivastava Jaipuria, Vice Chairperson of MR Seth Jaipuria Institutions and alumnus of Stern, New York University. He's the Vice Chairperson of this group of 40 institutions, schools and colleges across UP, Madhya Pradesh and Bihar, with schools with fee structures ranging from rupees 2,000 to rupees 8,000. So really wide spectrum. We have Linda, an alumna of Wharton and University of Chicago, who leads, is the Vice President of the international part of College Board's work. Has been there since 2007, providing opportunities for students outside of the US to connect with higher ed in the US and globally through programs such as SAT and advanced placements. Vishnu, an alumnus of the Harvard Grad School of Education, after a long career in consulting, coaching, and training for 12 years now, he has been an education leader, steering the Heritage Schools change story. Pamela, who's been associated with the Shiv Nadar Foundation for over 10 years now, leads strategic initiatives at the Vidya Gyan School, which is a unique and radical initiative that handpicks bright stars from rural, underprivileged backgrounds and aims at creating leaders from the bottom of the pyramid. Pamela holds an MBA in social leadership. Thank you all for joining us. If someone had told me 6 months ago that tens of thousands of schools across this country will be running online through phones, through laptops, through tablets, in the synchronous, asynchronous mode, I would have said impossible. It's not going to happen. Lo and behold, our heroes, our teachers, our school leaders really rose to the challenge, and as many of the earlier speakers spoke about it, in practically no time, they got ready for online teaching. Some of them may have never even used emails. Such was the intensity of the transition, changing their lesson plans, changing their curriculum, the entire content, pedagogy, everything, having to adapt so quickly is really commendable. In a recent survey that E&Y Parthenon had run, 50K plus schools had about a 70% adoption. I'm saying 50,000 rupees per annum plus schools. And this was about 30% in the sub 50K bracket, which means a lot of schools in our country. And what is also very fascinating about this shift is that I remember very vividly when we started, a large part of the parent community was saying, what kind of an eyewash is this? Should this even happen? Are you all doing this so you can continue to collect fee? And almost 2.5 months later, now there is a clamor for education to happen online in the entire academic session. We've seen a petition that's crossed 500,000 petitioners who are now saying it is not safe to open schools. Why don't you just go online? So definitely schools have done something very, very right. And let's begin with Srivats sharing with us one of these inspiring stories. Over to you, Srivats.
Hi, is my screen visible and I'm audible, Manit? All right. Thank you, Manit. Thank you, Ashoka University, for inviting me to speak at this conference. It's really a pleasure to be part of this unique group of schools and education leaders that are going to be talking here today. As Manit said, when people said 6 months ago what we have been able to do, if we were asked to imagine that, it would be almost impossible. Just to give you a context of where we come from at St. M.R. Jaipuria schools, we have a school in Lucknow that has been running since 1992. That is a premier school there. But over the last 6 years or so, we've gone decidedly into smaller cities and towns. And today we have 32 schools operational with 25,000 students. Our average fee range is around 3,900 rupees a month. So below that 50,000 rupees a year bracket that Manit talked about, where technology adoption has happened. So it was really a big challenge for us in terms of can we firstly imagine and then implement online classes taking place in these types of towns, cities, and schools. Again, to give you a context of the kinds of towns and cities that we are present in, we are, in terms of our schools, we are covering 3 states, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh, with a larger focus on Uttar Pradesh. And we are majorly in district headquarters, so cities that range in a population from 100,000 to 700,000 people, which in the context of India are pretty small cities. In the last 2 or 3 years, we have also gone to sub-district towns where the population is below a lakh, according to official figures. So in terms of our response, as we started this about 3 or 4 months back and realized that we have to really adapt to the physical premises of a school closing, we tried to think about what model we could adapt. And probably the first model in front of us was that adapted by sort of larger schools in Delhi, Bombay, etc. But we somehow quickly realized that probably that was not going to work for us. We had a large amount of consultations with teachers and parents. And we found that the medium that the majority of people are comfortable with and has large amount of usage across India was WhatsApp. So we said, let's start here. And we started by creating lesson videos recorded by teachers, having doubt clearance sessions, using WhatsApp groups to send question papers and assignments. And even teachers went the extra mile in case, a student did not have access to a smartphone. They did send even audio recordings to them. So slowly, while starting with WhatsApp as a primary medium, over the past 2 months, we have transitioned to a more synchronous model where we are using now Zoom, MS Teams, Google Hangout, and other tools as well. I think what worked for us, other than this, was that we quickly realized that we don't have all the answers. And when we interacted with parents right at the beginning of the lockdown in March and April, we were happy to admit that we don't have all the answers. And that's why the parent community was able to really respond and work with us, because they felt that we are open to their concerns. And these PTMs were not prescriptive, rather larger discussion forums. Recently, only a few days ago, we did a teacher survey. And as you see, WhatsApp was a primary tool used by teachers across our schools even now. But I think what is more important to understand is that even now, and even in our premier schools, we see, if you see the right side of this page, that a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning probably works better than only synchronous learning. We are thinking about the physical school model where, once a student comes in, we have to teach them everything and then they go home. But probably that is not the ideal to overload a student in 3 hours. if you use asynchronous model, it allows the student to learn at their own pace as well, probably do some learnings in the evening. So even for premier schools, I think this is a big lesson that you can take. Traditionally, the school runs for 3-4 hours at a time. Try to spread out the learning either through synchronous spreading out or through using asynchronous learning, where the student can self-pace their learning within a day. Teacher training and empowerment were very important to us. Again, as I said, 3 months ago, we could have never imagined our teachers would be where they have come and the effort that they would make. I think we really treated teachers at par with frontline warriors on COVID. Many people talk about the media, police people, but teachers put in an extraordinary effort as well. We try to empower them by training them both on pedagogy and technology, but also provided a lot of support from the head office in terms of providing SOPs for each and every technology medium, be it Zoom, Google Hangout, even for WhatsApp do's and don'ts, curriculum planning and calendar planning. And also we created a lot of content and conducted sample classes that teachers could attend. It was really important for us to sort of set the example and set the expectations. Also created role models out of those teachers. So a teacher whose classes are going really well, they would be shown across the network of schools to our teachers so that they could really learn from them, and that sort of peer learning could happen. Our head office team attended classes and gave feedback to teachers. I think this could happen much more effectively, and we've probably done much more of this now than we did in the past. Again, parents as partners, really parents had to come through for us. They borrowed devices from neighbors. There's amazing anecdotes that I have, probably won't be able to share here. But the asynchronous videos really allowed them to self-pace and for the learning to be flexible. We embraced the fact that parents are going to be in the room and really showcase our teaching learning abilities. This was the time to do that. I think also we use parents in assessments as invigilators. I know this has its detractors, but it really passed on the idea of integrity to students and parents. Very often in India, we tend to distrust parents and students, and I think there's an important lesson that could be learned in integrity for parents as well through this process. Overall satisfaction with online classes. Again, we did this recently, 2,000 plus parents responded, and I think we were reasonably satisfied with the feedback. But I think what is more interesting to me is that if I divide this feedback into even, looking at the kind of cities our schools in, so we were able to get excellent feedback even in cities below 2 lakhs and below 1 lakh population. So sub-district towns, in district headquarters, and then also in larger cities like Lucknow, Patna, Varanasi, and so on. Teacher perception of stakeholder satisfaction also across. So the teacher was not only satisfied, but they thought the parent and student is satisfied as well. So this is the caveat I want to end with. Even though parent satisfaction is high and teacher satisfaction is high, when you ask teachers, what is your perception of learning? It is much lower than in a physical classroom. So we say, is it always at par with a physical classroom being 5? They are only rating learning at 3.7 and attendance at 3.7 as well. This means that, online is great, but eventually it is a second best alternative to the physical classroom. Stakeholder expectations are lower because they are viewing this as a temporary solution. So I think I want to end with this caveat because we have the risk of being too gung-ho about this and think that this could replace physical schools forever. There is a lot that people learn while coming to school, and the physical and social development of students is also important. Just ending with opportunities for the future. I think lessons in integrity and self-discipline. I think these are huge lessons to learn in this temporary time period. Huge tests that we are giving our students and our parents. Teacher training and class observations, we've done more of those than we have done in years in the last 2 months. And schools will never be forced to close down for summer, for winter, for riots. Only school buildings will. So I think these are lessons that we need to take with us even post this COVID crisis. And these will change the way we conduct school education probably forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Srivats. It's incredible that you all are being able to ensure continuous learning for all kids across all your schools. And I see that strategically, or in fact, you did not really have a choice in this matter. You had to choose the asynchronous mode a lot more than the synchronous mode. Hats off to your teachers for recording their lessons. Hats off to you for engaging the parents. I think one of the key lessons here in the journey of the Jaipurias is around engaging parents earlier on, winning their trust, and then trusting them back in the assessments, and really building a community of learners, teachers, parents, and students alongside. Brilliant work, Srivats, and some fantastic insights for the audience. Next up is Vishnu from the Heritage Schools. Again, Vishnu jumped into this very, very early. In the first week of March itself, Heritage decided to shut down for a week. They could see the lockdown coming, and they suspended all classes and got into professional development of teachers on several online platforms. So by the 16th of March, we'd hit the ground running much before the lockdown was announced. So, Vishnu, over to you.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Manit, and thank you, Ashoka University, for this wonderful webinar. I find it hard to ignore the fact that there are about 1,600 people on a Friday evening listening to this webinar. It talks a lot about the potential of technology in the education space itself. I've been in this field attending and speaking in conferences for the last 10, 12 years. Never ever had an audience of 1,600 people. And the average number of people I connect every week is probably more than 3,000, 4,000. And I'm sure many of my panelists would agree that the opportunities for technology is phenomenal. I'm just going to quickly take a couple of seconds to share my slides. Can you see the slides?
No, Vishnu, we did and we lost them. Okay, now it's showing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so one of my challenges tonight is going to be how do we talk about this 3-month-long journey in 8 minutes? I'm sure a lot of educators would agree that this 3 months kind of looks like 3 years. I mean, I don't even recollect what happened pre-COVID because of the intensity of what we went through in the last 3 months. At the outset, I want to congratulate all the educators, school leaders, teachers, parents, and students out there in this conference because like Manit and Srivats had shared, I think teachers and schools rose up to the occasion. 3 months back, we saw a lot of agitation from parents, questioning what are we doing in schools. Today, I think parents are really wanting to continue the online education. The last I checked, I have about 95% attendance in my classes. This is much higher, in fact, almost higher than what I would probably be having in my physical classes. Right now, we have shut the school, but there are summer support programs running. Even then, I have a 90% attendance in it. Talks a lot about the engagement and the hard work teachers have put in. Over the last 3 months, me and my team have also trained about 2,000 teachers and school leaders around technology, virtual learning. And I see a lot of great work happening around the country. So hats off to the educators. I'm sure post-COVID, our own credibility and standing of private schools at least would be much higher in the public's mind space. I also want to address just about 10 seconds on this topic of why learning continuity is important. It's extremely important for parents and policymakers to understand that learning continuity is extremely critical to ensure student learning levels don't drop. There have been significant research, at least in the West, especially around long summer vacations. I think Brookings Institute, for example, had done some longitudinal studies of how even 2.5, 3 months of breaks without any learning support will lead to significant drops, especially around reading and writing. So my urge to school leaders is, even if the COVID extends beyond the next 3 or 4 months, we have to have some ways in which we reach out, even in situations where there is an difficulty in accessing hardware or even Wi-Fi connections. Even a simple phone call, for example, there is some research by Brookings University Institute that even a phone call every week leads to a 5 to 10 percentage point increase in reading levels, for example. So what we're doing right now, however ineffective, however imperfect it could be, still has a purpose, and we need to recognize that. In our 3-month-long journey, there are some insights we have gained and some mistakes we made. And I'm going to talk about 3 top insights which I would like to share with my team. I wish I had known this, and I'm glad we realized this through our journey. The first insight we have to make any virtual learning program successful is to focus on relationships. And the second insight is online videos is not virtual learning. I think there's a need for educators to recognize that virtual learning is not about online videos through Google Hangout on Zoom. There's a lot which has to happen before and after a video session. And the third insight which we have is that in times like these, it's extremely important to go back to the basics around repurposed curriculum and around focusing on the core instruction leadership practices. I'm going to spend a bit about each of these insights. The first on primacy of relationships. When we started this journey of virtual learning, by the way, we implemented a technology platform 3 to 4 years back, but it kind of didn't get institutionalized the way we would like it to, because there's not necessarily a buy-in across our teachers. But the COVID gave a great excuse for us to start using that platform for better transaction of teaching and learning. But when we started on, we clarified to our teachers that transition to a virtual learning is not a technical challenge, but an adaptive challenge. It is not about tools and techniques alone, but it's about relationships, about care, about love, and about holding the community together. So we spend a lot of time with our teaching community around holding them together and telling them that, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. We are with you, and we will give you that space and support for you to try out and figure out and help you improve your craft. We also reached out to several parents to help them understand their concerns, reached out to students, created rituals in our everyday teaching and weekly schedules to make those one-on-one connects. So for us, it's extremely important that online teaching is about nurturing relationships more than the technical aspects. And one of the things which we did over the last 3 months is to focus on social emotional learning curriculum. So we had built a social emotional learning curriculum called the Human Framework, and we had developed some social emotional SEL standards and learning targets. We repurposed them for the virtual world, and we focused an inordinate amount of time and energy around these. Srivastava was very right. Online learning cannot replicate the physical class time, and it should not replicate also, because in an online setup, there are far more important goals in the life of the child which we need to address. And we created a specific program around addressing those to ensure that the mental and the emotional health of the child and the parent remains good to continue the learning process. The second insight our community realized is that online videos is not virtual learning, which essentially means that if a school has only video sessions, which is synchronous learning sessions, as the primary medium of teaching and learning, then student engagement levels will significantly drop down. I mean, that's true of physical classes too. Lectures, a sage on the stage is not going to help students learn. What we then focused on is to ensure that we have a playlist, a technology where there's a playlist what students have to learn, and so that it enables a student to take the lead in learning. So it's like if you go to a YouTube channel, for example, there is a playlist which is curated to you. So what we created was a simple playlist online where the students do the pre-reads and the post-reads so that they are better prepared for the synchronous classes. For example, this is a snapshot of the system which we had created for each of our classes, where on the left you could see the playlist. You could see day-wise schedules, what they need to do. They also need, on the right, you can see what are the learning targets for the day, what they need to do before the synchronous class, what they need to do after that. You can also see some of the assignment which is posted there. So student is not hooked onto the screen always. There is a certain level of autonomy and certain sense of freedom you provide to the student to navigate the learning journey. There is also some tools and techniques we created where we can manage the business of teaching and learning, where I can see how many kids have read lessons, how many kids have not read lessons. If they've not read the specific article or not seen the video, the teacher is able to send a reminder. One of the problems with online learning or even online schools is the rigor of follow-up, so that students are able to stick on to a routine. The reason why 97% of people who attend MOOCs drop out and they don't complete is because there is no discipline and there's nobody to ensure discipline of completion of the course. So it's extremely important to have a framework or a system to ensure follow-through and ensure some check-ins so that students are kept on the task. The third insight is that we focused on the basics around focusing on what is important with respect to curriculum. We did not try to replicate the entire syllabus. We only focused on what is worth learning in these virtual learning environments. We also focus on something very foundational for any good school, which is instructional leadership. We relooked at the teacher observation framework, which we had developed. We started looking at what is important in a virtual learning platform. We trained teachers quickly and said, hey, among the 21 odd competencies you need to exhibit, we wanted to focus on the first two, which is, if you look at the top of the pyramid, you will see self-directed learning and substantive conversations. Now, these are two things which is extremely difficult for an average teacher in a physical classroom. But what we realized is that when you flip the classroom and you move to an online or a virtual environment, it's extremely easy, relatively easy to focus on these two things. And so that's one of the things which we did. We also ensured that there is peer observations virtually, there is virtual feedback given. There is also support provided for teachers who are struggling in terms of getting the classes on track. So we created frameworks to support. There's also a coaching advisory model specific around virtual learning pedagogies, which we created internally. So that's about what we did. And those are the three key insights. I'll talk more about it if there are any questions in the Q&A session. But I also want to talk about possibilities. What do we see going forward? One key thing we have realized is this virtual learning is here to stay. I don't think it is just a band-aid to manage the COVID situation. I think even the COVID situation is going to extend beyond the 3 or 4 months. It's probably going to run well into the next year. Even if it doesn't, I think the virtual learning is going to stay here. One of the analogies I was reading is that before the World War I, armies used to fight using the trench system or just used to shoot each other. But when they came out of the World War I think the entire army got mechanized, and it led to a huge boost in the way industrialization happened in the world. My sense is this is the excuse the world was looking for to reform education, and we see a lot of transition happening in the K-12 space as well, specifically on three things. One, I think there is going to be a lot of focus on personalized learning pathways, and which is not possible in a physical curriculum and a physical setup. It is absolutely possible and necessary in a virtual world. Second, I think there is an entire focus on assessments. People often talk about reform and curriculum. I think that's a wrong way to approach. What is important is reform and assessments. If reform and assessments happen, curriculum automatically reforms. So virtual learning makes it necessary for us to move away from the standardized test or moving away from a test which is just an MCQ or a quiz. You're going to focus more on authentic and real life assessments. And the third possibility, which I hope it's going to happen, and it is happening in our context, is the access to teachers is not limited to what I find in a 10, 20 kilometer radius to the physical class school. Now we are able to access some of the world's best teachers. Right now, we are able to get teachers from Oxford, able to get teachers from Southeast Asia, from south of India, teachers from US, for example. Some of them are doing pro bono work, and it's not even expensive. There are a lot of free resources available, which is not possible before in a physical context. But in a virtual world, we bring the world into the classroom, and probably one of the reasons why students find this very engaging. Two last things I just want to share is one, when you're looking at virtual learning, look at it as a comprehensive program. We had created an entire program, an entire platform, entire curriculum around it. We didn't look at it just as a Zoom or a Google Hangout or any online video format, but look at it as an entire program and rally the community around this program. Second, also around focusing on capability development, we've designed and rolled out a certificate program in virtual teaching. This is here to stay. based on our wisdom of training about 2,000 teachers, we just felt, hey, why don't we just make this as a MOOC, and so that it is accessed by one and all across the country. With this, I end my slides, Manit, and I'll wait for more Q&A.
Thank you, Vishnu. You've overrun a little bit, but brilliant insights. Again, I think what you talk about adaptive leadership in these times, it is shifting that mindset of teachers, of parents, of recognizing that this is not a temporary phase itself. It is a disruption with great opportunities for further disruption of a different kind, of a positive kind, changes that we can make towards student-directed learning, more personalized pathways, just the reforms that you're talking about. There are some incredible opportunities. There's a huge silver lining, and educators across the world must now use this boot camp to harness these opportunities. So let's move now to Pamela. Vidya Gyan is a very unique experiment. It's a residential school, and all of these students had to go back to their rural backgrounds where there are several challenges around devices, connectivity. So Pamela, over to you.
Thank you, Manit, and a very good evening and hello, friends. It's lovely being on this platform. Unfortunately, virtual. I wish we could all meet physically. But let me give you a little background about Vidya Gyan. So, if you all are, you must be all aware that India is 70% rural, and the children community of India, or the children population of India, 74% of the population of children are in rural India. So Vidya Gyan is a very innovative and radical institution. These are two academies which is focusing on finding talent from across India. We started off in Uttar Pradesh, where we get literally every year 2.5 lakh applications, all from parent income less than 1 lakh per annum. And we only pick up the top 400. So we have a very robust selection process. And now for the last few years, we've also been going across India. We've gone as far as Nagaland and Ladakh, all the way down south. So we have students from various states and various communities studying with us. As Manit said, these are residential schools, and it was a challenge sending them back. And when we had to go online, our first thought was that how do you teach students when they are in remote villages? And when we talk of remote villages, we're talking of villages which has no electricity, they won't have internet, they're very far off. You don't have, unfortunately, parent communities who can support them from, to learn, because most of our children are, representing farmer communities and migrant laborers. And keeping all that in mind, the first thing we did was focus on our teachers, who luckily remained on campus because these are residential schools. And a lot of effort was spent in explaining the teachers and working with the teachers to understand technology, and how do you design an entire curriculum which is going to be taught online for to students who come in at grade 6th, when they can't speak English and they don't know basic education systems. How do you go back to the same villages, and how do you teach online? So we worked on all those things, and while we worked on all those things, we also did a data analysis of what is the kind of medium the students can study on. And we realized that in villages, the only thing they had were smartphones. And luckily, most of our students did have it, but the enthusiasm to learn remained so high that it was interesting to see how they even borrowed smartphones from their neighbors and from friends, from relatives to study. So the enthusiasm levels remained very high. And so once we understood all that, we started designing. For us, the importance was not to complete the syllabus. It was how to make a curriculum interesting and fun and easy to learn. So how do you do project-based learning? So we worked on all those things. We got into the simple act of even understanding that if you have to teach, how does it not become boring for you? So we started off, after each class, we had a feedback from students. So we put the wardens on the job of doing a feedback to understand, are the students being able to understand? Are they being able to learn? Are they being able to retain? What do they want? And once we had that interesting learning, I think because they're children, is that attendance might be a challenge. So we started doing small classrooms, so easy to maintain, easy to understand if children have logged in, and random attendance. So we wouldn't do an attendance at the beginning of an online classroom. We would just do it randomly. So those were small learnings while we were working with these children. Framework of curriculum, what we should complete, what we shouldn't, and how do you use local platforms to do projects and programs, which is still a learning. So that's how we started off with the entire thing. Our focus was also to ensure that we do smaller classrooms. We did not focus on large numbers. So in a classroom setting, the way we went was we created a lot of offline materials. We realized that to make online interesting and also engaging, we need to create a lot of offline materials. So how do you create offline materials which are going to be recordings? So the way you moderate your voice, so the things you say, all that had to be worked upon. Very small tiny things had to be thought through, because we knew that when if you don't have internet and you don't have electricity, that you have to send the material at least 1 week in advance, so that students have studied it, they've understood the material. And when you go online, the teaching should be more engaging, where you're not teaching the student, but a classroom of 10 students should be interacting, being able to exchange notes with each other, and it's easier to understand if they've understood what they're being taught. The interesting part was that the parent community was very excited in the villages that teaching is continuing and it's not impacting them, because with all the worries they had, the socio-economic impact which it had in the villages, our worry was, will the students be able to cope up with the kind of backgrounds they come from while they're at home, because there would be so much tension at home. But interestingly, the parent community did a lot to support the teaching, and I think what we've done is we focused on from March to now, and now our strategy is how do we work on various if the school opens in September or if it opens in December, so how do we work on different phases. So that's how we've been working. It's a lot of interesting learning. It's a lot there's a lot we need to do, because we also realized our children are depending on smartphones. These are very small devices, and so classrooms became smaller in teaching. So it's classroom with 2 minutes, 3 minutes break in between, small classroom size of 10, not beyond, and keeping the teachers motivated, keeping the students motivated. These are some learnings, and as we are going ahead, we are making sure that each step is really thought through. We are doing baby steps, because we know that we have children sitting as far as a remote village near China, and sitting as far as a remote village near Burma. And a lot of time, there's a huge electricity problem. These are not urban problems. These are very rural problems. So we are keeping the rural problems in mind and going ahead. I think it's being very well received by the students, and we are hoping for the best.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing to continue learning despite all odds. It's just fantastic, and seeing that the parents and children are enthusiastic about it, actually going out, borrowing devices, you're moving to small groups to keep them engaged in all parts of the country. Absolutely fantastic, Pamela. Now moving on to Linda, I think in a country like ours where learning means examinations, and not having examinations means pretty much losing the academic session, uh, the College Board has pretty much pulled out a miracle, running 4.4 million tests across over 120 countries. It's just phenomenal, the scale at which you've been able to do this. So go ahead, Linda. I see you're figuring out your screen share or something. Over to you, Linda.
Manit, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes,
I am so sorry. I appear to be having some technical issues here, but let me figure out my screen share and let's get started here. Are you able to see my screen right now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So thank you, Manit, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today for this critically important topic on the transition to virtual learning in this COVID-19 era. So many of the educators out here that are joining us today probably know the College Board for our signature program, the SAT or SAT as it's known in India. But the College Board also has an instructional program called Advanced Placement or AP. An AP is a series of 38 rigorous university level courses that students are able to take while they are still in secondary school, typically in grades 11 and 12. And AP really is the gold standard for rigorous secondary school coursework in the US and in many parts of the world. As part of this program, not only do we provide curriculum and support to teachers, we also provide an annual end of course examination. And so in the mid-March timeframe, when all schools around the world were shutting down, we were really faced with a difficult decision to either continuing to offer the exams, deferring the exams, or canceling the exams for this year. None of these, in our opinion, were really acceptable choices, but at the moment, we thought those were the only choices that we have. The first two obviously are not really realistic. And the last one would really take away opportunities from really more than 3 million students globally
Linda,
to be able to.
Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but could you go into slideshow? I think it'll be easier for people to see.
Yes, give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Are you seeing that now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So as we were faced with, these decisions, as I said, the first two in terms of keeping the exam or deferring it and adjusting the schedule were really not great options for us. And as with each passing day, we felt like those are really not realistic options at all. And the third would take away an incredible opportunity for students, for 3 million students around the globe to be able to have their credentials for this year, a credential that they have been trying to work towards really, really diligently all year long. So we thought that, really these were not good options for us at all. So what did we decide to do? We wanted to understand from a student perspective whether or not they wanted to continue to take their exams this year, whether they felt like they were ready to take their exams this year. So we surveyed students, and overwhelmingly what they told us was that they wanted the opportunity to be able to take their AP exams this year. So much had already been taken away. They didn't want one more thing to be taken away from them this year. But understandably, students were very concerned about not being ready for their exams this year because of school closures. And, for us, hearing this feedback and 91% of students telling us this, we simply could not ignore this feedback. And so what we decided to do was twofold. So we very, very quickly worked on a two-pronged solution. The first is related to instruction, and the second is related to exams. And so let me talk about the instruction piece first here. Because of the potential gap in instruction as schools closed, some schools were able to, as you heard earlier from some of the school leaders here, some schools were able to very quickly and successfully transition into virtual instruction. Other schools were a little less successful with that, and we needed to keep in mind that across the more than 20,000 schools in which AP is given, there is a huge range there. So to address the instruction gap, within a 2-week period, we launched free online classes to allow AP instruction to continue during this disrupted period. These classes were taught by master AP teachers. We recruited the best AP teachers in the world to teach these courses. They were hosted on YouTube. they were offered live every single day for about a 6-week period, but these were also available on demand for students who could not tune in live, or for teachers who wanted to be able to leverage these lessons in their virtual instruction separately. And the content focused on reviewing the first 75% of the course, and in a minute I'll tell you why it focused on that. But we also included lessons that were from the last 25% of the course, and the reason being that when schools closed in the right around the middle of March, most schools were able to get through about 75% of the curriculum, with 25% of the curriculum that they were trying to teach online or were not teaching at all. And so teachers could use these as supplements to their instruction, but we had designed them in a way where it wasn't dependent on students having separate virtual instruction available to them. So that was the first piece. The second piece is related to the at-home testing. And so as we thought, and this of course is really one of the bigger challenges that we had. And as we were thinking through the solution, there were a couple of key considerations here. One was access. Will all students be able to access the exams and be able to take these exams? Again, recognizing that all students had differential access to devices, to connectivity, to different home environments, etc. The second major piece is, of course, security. How can we ensure integrity in a at-home connected environment where students can Google anything, where they can talk to anybody through a laptop or a mobile phone, anything? And then the last piece is acceptance. Will colleges and universities accept these scores? Will they use them in the same way as they have in the past in terms of recognizing this as a credential for students, either for admissions purposes or to grant placement and credit for students? So those were the key considerations, and we felt like we had to solve the problem for all of these, or solve it to an acceptable point in order to be able to move forward with this solution. So let me talk you through each one of these and what we decided to do. First, around access. As I mentioned earlier, students had differential access. We could not assume that everybody had devices. We could not assume that everybody had connectivity. So in terms of access, we felt like we could not continue to administer a 3-hour exam, which is 2.5 to 3 hours is the length of typical AP exams. This year they had to be shorter because we just did not know what the home environments were for students. So what we did was we designed 45-minute exams that we still felt like psychometrically were still valid, only covered content in the 75% of the course, knowing that school was disrupted for many students. And students could use a variety of different devices. That was important to us. And keeping in mind that, for some students that didn't really matter because they didn't have access to technology at all, we also worked with different service providers and tech companies to provide devices and wireless hotspots to underprivileged students, which, we coordinated distribution of that to students. And lastly, we had to be realistic and understand that some students were going to either have conflicts with the schedule or tech issues that we really just didn't know about, or other issues that we simply could not predict at the moment. So we had to offer multiple windows when students could take the exam. And for us, that meant having a primary testing window, a makeup window, and even this third exception testing window to be able to serve all students. So that was on the access front of things. With regards to security, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges here, how can we ensure integrity? And while I can't tell you everything, given the sensitivity of this particular topic, I can share a couple of things here. And I should note that these exams are unproctored. We simply did not have sufficient time in this constrained period to put in place a system that would allow for online proctoring, as well as comply with the strict privacy requirements that were in place, not only in the US, but really across the world. So we had to really think about this as an unproctored exam. So in terms of thinking about that, the things we had to solve for: the content. we could not use multiple choice questions, so we transitioned to only using free response questions that focus on higher order analytical skills where answers just could not be Googled. And so we leveraged our entire test development team very quickly to refocus all of this, the questions on that. And we've had these in prior exams as well. The only difference this year is that that's the only thing we focused on with this exam. Students had to take this simultaneously. Everybody had to take the exams at the same time. And on our end, we employed additional post-test analytics, technology like plagiarism check software. We use a software called Turnitin in order to check for plagiarism and to ensure that, you know, the materials students were submitting were truly their own. And of course, our own staff were monitoring social media to ensure, you know, students were not trying to get an unfair advantage. And to ensure that students don't have the incentive to cheat, we also set much more severe consequences this year, including reporting any cases to universities where students were sending their scores to and asking universities to deny admissions to those students if that were the case. And so, you know, so again, from a security standpoint, we felt comfortable with the solution that we put in place. Our experts felt comfortable. And then the last hurdle was around acceptance. It was important that more than the 4,000 higher education institutions which currently recognize and accept AP continue to do so. And we consulted with numerous higher education leaders and confirmed that not only will they accept scores from this year's exam, but also knowing the crisis that we are in, they will also exercise flexibility for students and not disadvantage them in the event that they could not take this year's exams. So what was the result of all of this? Let me just share this with you very quickly. We thought this was a huge success, more successful than, in fact, we anticipated. Our AP Live classes were viewed 33 million times by 5.3 million unique viewers. We attracted so much attention that celebrities like Lin-Manuel Miranda from the play Hamilton, Melinda Gates, and Jeb Bush also signed on. And this is important because this really provided some additional encouragement and motivation to students at a time when they were already dealing with a lot of stress in their lives. Testing is still going on right now, but so far we've had 4.3 million exams started with about 93% of students who completed their exams. And in fact, this rate is higher than prior years when we had actually only 91% of students complete their exams. And some of the reasons here are that students are disrupted because of, you know, illness or power going out, or, you know, a host of different issues that could cause disruptions. These happen in other years as well. Or there are cases where students look at the questions and think that it's just too hard and they don't want to attempt it. But we're very pleased with the completion rate this year. And from a technology standpoint, we had less than 1% of students who had technical challenges with submitting their responses. But in the end, we felt, and that is a really small proportion, but in terms of absolute numbers, it also means tens of thousands of students having issues. So it was important to have makeup exams available. And in the end, the majority of students and teachers really agreed that we made the right decision for AP exams this year, despite the challenges. And now as we kind of look to the future, we are taking many of these lessons that we've learned through this experience as we, you know, think about how we support schools as they come back into session, knowing that virtual instruction in some blended format is likely going to stay for, you know, not only just the short term, but I think the long term. So we feel that our role is really trying to figure out how we augment and support schools in that way, but in no way replacing that. As was mentioned earlier, I don't think online can ever replace the richness of an in-person teaching and learning experience. As I am also struggling with e-learning with my own children, I really think that the human touch is absolutely critical to learning. From an assessment standpoint, we've learned a lot about how to administer digital exams, but also that the whole assessment model needs to change, thinking about assessments throughout the year, but also focusing on more higher order skills through project-based work. Because in a world where, facts are just a Google search away, we really have to think differently about this. So let me end there and thank all of you for having me today and for joining us. And lastly, I really just want to commend all of you for your resilience in the middle of this crisis. It's such an honor to be among you today. Now, Manit, back to you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Really, with most of the examination boards across the globe giving up, someone who had to manage 5 million exams keeps at it is absolutely fantastic. Gives us a lot of hope for the future. And what you say about assessments, and I think Vishnu spoke about it earlier, assessment is the biggest lever for change. And if we're compelled to change something because we don't have an option now, and that could bring about reforms that we've just been sitting on for a while, it could have a significant change. It could cause that change. It could precipitate that change. So really looking forward to that. Now, I have one question for the school fellows, Vishnu, Pamela, and Srivastava. So, to our viewers who are looking to devise an online, a virtual learning strategy, what are a couple of insights, or what is your advice to them? 2 or 3 things.
Who do you want to go first?
Srivats, go for it.
So I think 2 things. Context. Be very, very aware of your context. Don't try to copy somebody else doing well in another context. Don't be ashamed of your context. Do what is usable in your context. And secondly, communication. Communicate with stakeholders, parents, teachers, and communication has to be two-way. Things are too new for all of us. Many times we think we have all the answers. We simply don't. We need to communicate in a two-way manner with parents, with teachers in order to come to answers. So context and communication.
I can go next, Manit.
Go ahead.
So, Manit, so fortunately and unfortunately, technology doesn't add, it only multiplies, which essentially means that if you have a great pedagogical practice, if you have a great culture, online learning will just amplify it. So there's a lot of possibilities. But if you don't have strong internal pedagogical practices, online learning is going to make it worse. Keep in mind, online learning for the first time has also gotten the parents into the class. And there is a public assessment of how teachers are doing. And that's going to happen in it. All the more reason why I would strongly urge school leaders to focus on the basics. Basics around how well is your curriculum articulated? Do you have simple learning objectives? Are your assessments very clear? Does it measure what it's supposed to measure? Do teachers do things which are basic? You can just classify them as 5 key pedagogical practices and just focus on those. And is every teacher in your community follows those 5 pedagogical practices to run an effective class? So my key suggestion would be focus on the basics, because technology will just amplify it for you.
For us, the focus is is similar to what you are saying, but a little different, because when we start working, we think of students think of a little girl sitting in a remote village in Ladakh, a 10-year-old girl sitting there, a little boy, a 12-year-old in a remote village of Lakhimpur. So we have a student body like that. So for online materials which we create is of key importance. So for us, that is one area of the focus area. The other is the feedback we get from the students. So a regular communication with the students and a feedback on what they are understanding, what do they want to learn. For us, the finishing the the syllabus is not important. how do we design the curriculum is more important, that every student is able to understand and learn from that. And third, keep the motivation of the teachers, the parents, and the students on a high, because this might go on for a while. So these are the three focus areas for us. As I said, we are doing baby steps because for us we have children from a very different society.
Thank you so much, Pamela. One question to
Mana,
you.
I'm sorry, could I also add something to that? I know you asked the school folks, but I think one thing that we have found, which I think is important for this group, is think about collaboration. Think about how you can leverage technology to really bring the strengths of your teachers to bear. I think in the classroom, we ask teachers to do everything. But in this online environment, as kind of we learned through our AP Live courses, we could leverage the best teachers in the world to deliver to thousands of students, tens of thousands of students at one time. So think about which teachers have what strengths, how you can leverage that, and how they can all collaborate in order to really deliver very rich, meaningful experiences, leveraging their own strengths, but also learning from other teachers.
So, Linda, the one other question that I had for you is, I'm sure you all worked on figuring out unproctored exams and academic honesty. And one of the solutions, the difficult path that you took, was to just change the entire assessment, to move away from multiple choice, to ask questions that cannot be searched on Google. But if you were to move on the other end, I'm not sure schools in India would be able to do that just yet, given the diversity that we have. Is there hope there? Is there, in terms of the technology that you may have explored, possibilities for us to be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is a gradual process. To your point around, can we move so quickly to redesigning the way that we do assessments? I think that will take time to do. In terms of leveraging technology, there are numerous providers out there that provide online proctoring that schools can leverage at this point. In the US, one of the largest providers is ProctorU, and in some of our other assessments, we work with them as well, but that requires having a platform that could support that, and we simply just needed more time if we were to go in that direction and do that. But those technologies are available, and we also try to use as much as we can things like plagiarism checks. I mentioned Turnitin is the provider that we use for their plagiarism software, and they've done a lot in terms of really perfecting that technology. And then for us, again, I can't say too much here, but there's a lot of post-exam analytics that we can do as well in terms of looking at whether or not there's some abnormal patterns in terms of performance and behavior and things like that, that would also give you some clues in terms of whether or not anyone is gaining an unfair advantage.
Okay, I think we only have a couple of minutes to go. They've given us a 5-minute extension. And the one burning question that I have is, what could the new normal look like? And I'm not talking about 3 months from now or 6 months from now. What is the opportunity? What are the possibilities that we're looking at in 2 or 3 years? What could this disruption mean for us? What would schools look like? What would this whole universe of learning look like? And I know 8 years ago, I met this professor at Harvard who was saying that in times where you can learn when you want, where you want, with who you want, from whom you want, schools and colleges will have to adapt. It's just a matter of time. And yet that adaptation was slow. And now, is this going to accelerate some of those reforms? And what would those reforms look like? What would schools look like in some time?
So I'll go again. So I think one of the major points is that we have to look at the school day as a more flexible time, and we have to not view learning ending at 1:30 p.m. in India. we know that students consume video and better than text. So I think the asynchronous learning that we've learned is going to actually go on post COVID as well. I think second thing very quickly is that we have learned that teachers have an amazing ability to adapt and learn. The kind of work that they've done over the past 3 months has been mind-boggling. And I think now we are going to set higher expectations for ourselves and for teachers and their ability to bring about change in themselves and the teaching learning pedagogies.
Thanks.
Manit, I will probably take, even at the risk of sounding very ambitious, but I'm going to take the risk of sharing what we are really thinking at the Heritage Schools. Many years back, we actually created a hybrid school, a prototype. And we went to the parents and said, hey, why do you want to do a traditional grade 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? Why don't we create personalized pathways for you? Why don't we have opportunities for students to work on their projects of interest, do internships, write research papers, work in a startup, and then get ready for college? If it's a matter of going to just finishing a grade 12, but at least give flexibility early on. But I think back then, parents are very excited. But when they had to really take the call to shift to a personalized curriculum, they wanted to take the easy path, the time and tested path. I think now parents are more open to experimenting what is relevant for their children. I think COVID has really forced the alternatives and possibilities. Today, many parents are saying, hey, I can just continue doing this, not just for the next 3 or 4 months, because they see some of their students really interested in doing things which they really care about. So my view is parents will be far more open to alternative models of deeper learning. And second thing, which is definitely will happen and has to happen, and I pray it happens in a country like ours, we relook at what assessment is, which is not just test and content-based assessment. One of the challenges you pose is how do you prevent plagiarism and copying? One, of course, there are technology solutions to it. Another is ask questions which you can't copy. That's an alternative way of doing it. The problem in India is much of the questions can be copied. But what if you design assessment which is difficult to actually copy? You really need to apply your mind to come up with your own unique answer, which has your own unique voice. So relooking an assessment is something which we should do. And I think COVID is a great blessing in disguise in that sense.
To us, the opportunity is, and it's actually very exciting to see how now through the online platform, we can get a lot of teaching happening in the rural parts of India. Right now, we were all very dependent on what is already existing. So it's so interesting thinking that, if you have, just by example, a Harvard teacher, faculty teaching somebody in a remote village of maybe Nagaland or Manipur or one of these areas. And, one of the challenges while we were at Vidyagyan, we realized was when our children wanted to be preparing for the competitive exams, each time we had to take them from very remote school locations to the city for training. And if you have this virtual world and opportunity, everything is accessed online. It's so much easier for the children of the rural world to so much learning and so much basic education also. If you turn and see a student of a class 1 is unable to read a book of a grade 5, unable to read a book of grade 1, all that would stop because you would have so many support systems happening. So we are very excited about getting online teaching to the real world, which is the rural India.
Yeah.
And then I would just add that, what I said earlier, I think technology is going to continue to play a huge role, but I think we will also begin to really appreciate the human touch as well, and to figure out, where it is critical for teachers to have a role and leverage technology really effectively. And then the second thing I think is that, this COVID crisis and online learning environment is really going to shine a light on what's important for us to teach children, what is really worth learning. Because in a captive school environment, you can go through this and kids have no choice but to pay attention to you. But in an online environment, it's so easy to ignore things that are viewed as Why is that important? And so more engaging activities, really thinking about personalizing learning, as Vishnu had shared, is going to be absolutely critical, I think, in the next couple of years.
Okay, I'm checking from Ali if I haven't heard the bell. If I haven't, I can really go on.
Manit, unfortunately, we are out of time.
We are out of time.
Although
Okay.
this is endlessly fascinating, but we are out of time. So
There are several questions that are parked
yes,
here. I would only request the audience who've been extremely patient, if they could post these questions on the social media, or what we'll try to do is put answers in comments. I'll send the questions to the panelists, and they'll place the question and then the answer on the YouTube channel where this is displayed.
yeah.
Ali, could you help with what
Yes, we can.
to look for the YouTube channel? If you could put it on the chat, it would
Yeah,
be
actually,
very
they just need to go to the Ashoka University YouTube channel. Both the tracks are live there as well, so
okay.
they can put in
Uh,
questions.
so we're in strange times, depressing at many levels, have been perhaps the most demanding time for educators, because unlike other people working from home, their life hasn't been really flexible. They've had to work even harder. And schools have probably, school managements, leaders, boards have all been more stressed than they have ever been, and they've really stretched themselves to rise to the challenge. I think over and above that, the opportunity, the potential for change, the excitement that this can create, the disruption this can create could be really extraordinary. Just like many of us are saying that this is a wake-up call when it comes to Mother Nature. This is also a wake-up call when it comes to education. We really need to change our ways, and we've gone too slow in our reforms. And this is opening up some opportunities that we cannot let go. We must harness. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Srivastava, Pamela, Linda, and Vishnu, and Ali, for having us all here. It was
Thank you.
wonderful chatting with all of you, and I'm sorry we could not take the questions. This was designed more for exemplar schools to share their presentations. So we'll come back to you on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. I will just wind up for the audience. I think all of you may go on to your other pursuits. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Manit, for a wonderful session.